Chapter 6. On the subsequent morning, younger Mr. Ware anticipated occasions via inscribing in his diary for the day, right away after breakfast, these feedback, arranged approximately piano. Began work upon ebook. The date certainly deserved to be distinguished from its fellows. Theron turned into so conscious of its significance that he not simplest prophesied within the little Morocco-shire diary which Alice had given him for Christmas, but lower back after he had were given out upon the front steps of the parsonage to have his hat brushed afresh via her. "Wonders will by no means end," she said jocosely. "With you getting precise approximately your clothes, there isn't whatever on this wide world that can't show up now. One would not go out to convey domestic a piano every day," he made solution. "Except, I want to make such an effect upon the person that he's going to deal lightly with that first cash charge down. Do you realize," he added, watching her turn the felt brim below the wisp broom strokes, "I'm thinking a number of getting me a normal silk range pipe hat." "Why do not you, then?" she rejoined, but with none ring of happy acquiescence in her tone. He fancied that her face lengthened a bit, and he instantly ascribed it to reminiscences of the way wherein the roses were bullied out of her personal headgear. "You're pretty certain, now, puppy," he made haste to trade the problem, "that the employed girl can wait simply as well as no longer till fall?" "Oh, yes," Alice replied, putting the hat on his head, and smoothing again his hair behind his ears. "She'd only be within the way now. You spot, with warm weather approaching, there might not be tons cooking. We're going to take all our meals out right here, and that saves a lot paintings that truly what stays is hardly ever extra than looking after a bird cage. And, besides, now not having her will almost half of pay for the piano. But while cold climate comes, you are sure you'll consent," he advised. Like a shot, she confided him, and, after a happy little caress, he started out again on his momentous challenge. Thurston's become a place regarding which reviews differed in Octavius. That it typified progress, and helped extra than every other feature of the village to convey it updated, nobody indeed disputed. One may flow approximately a first-rate deal, in reality, and hear no different view expressed. But then again one may stumble into communication with one small storekeeper after every other, and examine that the united in resenting the existence of Thurston's, as rival farmers would possibly be part of to curse a long drought. Each had his unique, flaming criticism. The little dry goods sellers requested mournfully how they might be predicted to compete with an established order which can buy bankrupt stocks at 100 special points, and make a earnings if handiest 1-1/3 of the articles were offered for more than they might cost from the jobber. The little boot and shoe dealers, clothiers, hatters, and furriers, the small traders in carpets, crockery, and furniture, the vendors of hardware and household utensils, of leathern goods and photo frames, of wallpaper, musical devices, and even toys, all had the same pathetically unanswerable question to propound. But more often than not they positioned it to themselves, because the others were at Thurston's. The Reverend Theron Ware had entertained alternatively sturdy perspectives in this difficulty, and that handiest every week or in the past. Certainly one of his first acquaintances in Octavius had been the owner of the most important e-book store in the region, a mild and bald old man who produced the complete impact of a bibliophile upon what the slightest investigation showed to be most effective a meager acquaintance with publisher circulars. But as a minimum he had the air of loving his enterprise, and the younger minister had loved an extended talk with, or alternatively, at him. Out of this communicate had come the statistics that the shop become dropping money. Now not even the stationery department now showed an income worth bringing up. When Octavius had contained handiest 5,000 inhabitants, it boasted 4 e-bookshops, of them suitable ones. Now, with a population extra than doubled, simplest those latter 2 survived, and they need to quickly go to the wall. The motive? It become in a nutshell. A e-book which offered at retail for $1.50 fee, the bookseller 90 cents. If it was in any respect a famous e-book, Thurston's marketed it at 80 to 9 cents, and anyways at an income of simplest 2 or 3 cents. Of direction it become finished to widen the established order's patronage, to carry human beings into the shop. Similarly of root, it become destroying the ebook enterprise and debauching the reading tastes of the community. Without the profits from the light and ephemeral famous literature of the season, the ebook Keep Right couldn't hold up its stock of greater solid works, and indeed could not lengthy keep open at all. Alternatively, Thurston's dealt with not anything keep the demand of the instant, and supplied best the books which have been the talk of the week. For this reason, in undeniable phrases, the ebook trade was going to the dogs, and it was the same with quite nearly every different exchange. Theron turned into angry at this, and on his return domestic told Alice that he favored her to make no purchases something at Thurston's. He even resolved to preach a sermon on the subject of the present-day idea of admiring the outstanding for crushing the small, and sketched out a few notes for it which he thought solved the trouble of flaying the nearby abuse without citing it through call, that they had lain on his desk now for 10 days or extra, and on handiest the preceding Friday he had speculated upon using them that coming Sunday. In this bright and pleased Tuesday morning he walked with a blithe step unhesitatingly down the primary avenue to Thurston's, and entered with none display of repugnance the door next to the window wherein, flanked by dangling banjos and key bugles constructed in pyramids, changed into displayed the sign, Pianos at the Installment Plan. He changed into recognized with the aid of a few responsible persons, and handled with distinguished deference. They were charmed with the intelligence that he desired a piano, and inquisitive about his wish to pay for it only a bit at a time. They had unique terms for clergymen, and made him feel as though those had been being extended to him on a silver charger by using kneeling admirers. It was so smooth to shop for things here that he turned into a trifle disturbed to discover his flowing path interrupted by using his own complete ignorance as to what kind of piano he wanted. He looked at all they had in stock, and heard them performed upon. They differed greatly in price, and, so he fancied, nearly as a lot in tone. It discouraged him to note, however, that several of those he idea the finest in tone had been most of the very most inexpensive within the lot. Pondering this, and staring in hopeless puzzlement from one to any other of the huge black bright monsters, he abruptly notion of something. I might alternatively now not determine for myself, he said, I recognize so little approximately it. In case you do not thoughts, I will have a chum of mine, a skilled musician, step in and make a selection. I've a lot self-belief in her judgment. He introduced hurriedly, it will contain simplest a day or s delay. The following second he changed into sorry he had spoken. What could they assume once they noticed the organist of the Catholic Church come to select out a piano for the Methodist parsonage, and how could he decorously choose the request to her to undertake this mission? He might not meet her once more for ages, and to his provincial notions writing would have seemed out of the query. And wouldn't it now not be disagreeable to have her realize that he turned into shopping for a piano through part bills? Terrible Alice's dread of the washerwoman's gossip occurred to him at this, and he smiled regardless of himself. Then suddenly the problem vanished. Of course it would come all right in some way. The entirety did. He was on more impregnable ground, shopping for the substances for the new e-book over at the stationery facet. His original goal had been to bestow this patronage upon the vintage bookseller, however those suavely clever humans in Thurston's had had the impact of placing him on his honor after they asked, would there be anything else, and he had followed them unresistingly. He indulged to the total his whim that everything moving into the development of Abraham need to be spick and span. He watched with his own eyes a whole ream of large glazed white paper being sliced down by way of the cutter into single sheets, and thrilled with a singular ecstasy as he laid his hand upon the spotless bulk, so wooingly did it invite him to start. He tried a score of pens before the proper one came at hand. When a field of these were laid apart, with ink and pen holders and a touch bronze inkstand, he made a sign that the outfit became whole. Or no, there have to be some blotting paper. He had always used those blotting pads given away through insurance organizations. His congregations never failed to comprise one or more agents, who had those to bestow via the armful, but the e-book deserved a virgin blotter. Theron stood via at the same time as all this stuff were being tied up together in a parcel. The inspiration that they should be sent nearly harmed him. Oh, no, he could carry them home himself. So strongly did they enchantment to his sanguine creativeness that he couldn't forbear hinting to the person who had proven him the pianos and changed into now accompanying him to the door that this package deal beneath his arm represented potentially the fee of the piano he became going to have. He did it in a roundabout manner, with certainly one of his droll, hesitating smiles. The man did no longer recognize in any respect, and Theron had not the temerity to repeat the remark. He strode home with the treasured package as rapid as he could. I notion at first class, in spite of everything, not to commit myself to a ramification, he defined about the piano at dinner time. In this type of be counted as this, the opinion of an professional is everything. I'm going to have one of the predominant musicians of the City Cross and try all of them, and tell me which we ought to have. And while he's approximately it, said Alice, you would possibly ask him to make a little listing of a number of the new track. I've got Manor in the back of the Times, being without a piano. See you later. Inform him no longer any very hard portions, you recognize. Yes, I understand, put in Theron, nearly swiftly, and commenced speak me of different things. His verbal exchange was of the maximum rambling and desultory sort, because all of the at the same time as the two lobes of his mind, as it were, stored up a dispute as to whether or not Alice need to were advised that this principal musician become of her very own sex. It in reality had been better, at the outset, he determined, but to say it now might be to make investments the fact with undue importance. Sure, that was quite clear, best the clearer it had become. From one point of view, the shadier it waxed from the alternative. The trouble virtually disturbed the younger minister's thoughts throughout the meal, and his abstraction became so marked at final that his spouse commented upon it. A penny in your thoughts, she said, with pleased briskness. This historical method of the farmland had continually as a substitute jarred on Theron. It provided itself now to his mind as a principally worrying banality. I'm going to start my e-book this afternoon, he remarked impressively. There may be a great deal to consider. It grew to become out that there has been even more to think about than he had imagined. After hours of solitary musing at his desk, or of pacing up and down before his open e-book cabinets, Theron determined the first shadows of a can-also-day twilight starting to fall upon that lovely pile of white paper, nonetheless unstained by means of ink. He saw the e-book he desired to jot down before him, in his intellectual vision, a whole lot extra fairly than ever. However, the concept of starting it impetuously, and hurling it off warm and sparkling week by week, had dwindled away like a dream. This long afternoon, spent head-to-head with an assignment born of his own brain however the day before today, but already a lot larger than himself, was simply a most fruitful time for the younger clergyman. The classes which reduce most deeply into our awareness are those we study from our children. Theron, on this first day's contact with the offspring of his fancy, determined revealed to him an unsuspected and brilliant fact. It turned into that he was a very ignorant and rudely untrained younger guy, whose pretensions to intellectual authority among any knowledgeable human beings could be laughed at with deserved contempt. Unusually enough, after he had weathered the first shock, this discovery did now not dismay Theron Ware. The very completeness of the conviction it carried with it, saturated his mind with a sense as if the reality had surely been recognized to him all along. And there got here, too, after a bit, a nearly pleasing sense of the significance of the revelation. He had been merely drifting in fatuous and conceited blindness. Now suddenly his eyes were open, he knew what he had to do. Lack of understanding become a factor to be remedied, and he might forthwith bend all his energies to cultivating his thoughts till it should blossom like a lawn. On this temper, Theron mentally measured himself towards the greater conspicuous of his colleagues inside the conference. Additionally, they had been ignorant, clownishly ignorant. The difference was that they had been doomed through native incapacity to go on all their lives without ever locating it out. It turned into apparent to him that his case changed into better. There has been brilliant promise inside the very fact that he had found his shortcomings. He had started the afternoon with the aid of taking down from their places the various works in his meager library which bore more or less relation to the assignment in hand. The 80 books which constituted his printed possessions were almost fully from the click of the e-book difficulty. The few exceptions have been volumes which, although posted elsewhere, had come to him through that massive circulating agency of the General Convention, and wore the stamp of its approval. Perhaps it became the sight of these one-half-filled shelves which began nowadays tremendous revolution in Theron's reviews of himself. He had by no means thought plenty earlier than approximately proudly owning books. He were too bad to buy many, and the situations of canvassing approximately among one's parishioners, which the thrifty e-book challenge imposes upon those who would have without buying, had always repelled him. Now, suddenly, as he moved along the two shelves, he felt ashamed at their beggarly displaying. The Land and the e-book, in 3 portly volumes, changed into the most pretentious of the aids, which he eventually culled from his series. Beside it he laid out Bible lands, rivers and lakes of Scripture, Bible manners and customs, the Genesis and Exodus extent of Whedon's statement, a few antique numbers of the Methodist Quarterly Assessment, and a copy of Josephus, which had belonged to his grandmother, and had visited him via many a weary Sunday afternoon in boyhood. He glanced casually through these, separately, as he took them down, and started to worry that they had been now not going to be of so much use as he had thought. Then, seating himself, he studied carefully through the 13 chapters of Genesis, which chronicle the story of the founder of Israel. Of direction he had recognized this story from his earliest years. In almost each bankruptcy, he came now upon a word or an incident which had served him as the basis for a sermon. He had preached approximately Hagar in the wasteland, about Lot's wife, about the visit of the angels, about the intended sacrifice of Isaac, about a dozen other things, counseled by the historic narrative. In some way this time all of it appeared specific to him. The people he examined approximately have been altered to his imaginative and prescient. Heretofore poetic light had shone approximately them, wherein indeed they had not glowed in a halo of sanctification. Now, with the aid of some hazard, this mild become long gone, and he saw them instead as untutored and unwashed barbarians, filled with animal lusts and ferocities, suffering via violence and foul chicanery to at ease a foothold in a rustic which did no longer belong to them, all rude tramps and robbers of the uncivilized simple. The obvious truth that Abram was a Chaldean struck him with peculiar pressure. How became it, he questioned, that this had in no way took place to him earlier than? Examining himself, he observed that he had supposed vaguely that there had been Jews from the start, or at least, say, from the flood. However, no, Abram changed into introduced simply as a citizen of the Chaldean metropolis of Ur, and there has been no trace of any distinction in race between him and his neighbors. It became especially noted that his brother, Lot's father, died in Ur, the metropolis of his nativity. Clearly the circle of relatives belonged there, and have been Chaldeans like the relaxation. I do no longer cite this as in any respect a hanging discovery, but it did have a curious effect upon Theron Ware. Up to that very afternoon, his belief of the sort of e-book he desired to write down had been founded upon a famous book called Ruth the Moabitess, written through a priest he knew thoroughly, the Reverend E. Ray Mifflin. This model performance bothered itself under no circumstances with hard factors, but went swimmingly along through scented summer season seas of pretty rhetoric, teaching not anything, its miles true, however appealing a bargain and promoting like hot cakes. Now, all of a sudden, Theron felt that he hated that sort of e-book. His work ought to be of a massively exceptional order. He may pretty anticipate, he concept, that if the reality that Abram became a Chaldean turned into new to him, it would fall upon the sector in fashionable as a novelty. Very well, then, there has been his threat. He could write a found-out book, showing who the Chaldeans were, and how their manners and beliefs differed from and motivated. It turned into at this psychological immediate that the wave of self-condemnation suddenly burst upon and submerged the young clergyman. It passed again, leaving him staring fixedly on the pile of books he had taken down from the shelves, and gasping a bit, as if for breath. Then the humorous aspect of the thing, perversely enough, appealed to him, and he grinned feebly to himself at the funny story of his having imagined that he may want to write learnedly about the Chaldeans, or something else. However, no, it should not continue to be a comic story. His long cellular face grew extreme beneath the new clear-up. He would analyze what there has been to be found out approximately the Chaldeans. He rose and walked up and down the room, gathering sparkling strength of cause as this inviting field of research unfolded out its vistas earlier than him. Possibly, yes, he might by the way explore the mysteries of the Moabitic past as nicely, and hence position the Reverend E. Ray Mifflin to confusion on his personal situation. That could in itself be a useful component, due to the fact Mifflin wore child gloves at the convention, and affected an insupportable superiority of dress and demeanor, and there might be well-known delight a few of the plainer and worthier brethren at seeing him taken down a peg. Now for the first time there rose relatively in Theron's thoughts that casual allusion which Father Forbes had made to the Turanians. He recalled, too, his temporary feeling of mortification at now not knowing who the Turanians have been, at the time. Probably, if he had probed this count number extra deeply, now as he walked and pondered within the little dwelling-room, he might have traced the whole of the afternoon's intellectual reviews to that risk statement of the Romish priest. However, this speculation did now not detain him. He mused rather upon the terrific library Father Forbes must have. Properly, how does the e-book come on? Have you purchased to my girl Keturah, but? It turned into Alice who spoke, establishing the door from the kitchen, and putting in her head with a pretense of first-rate and solemn warning, but with a correcting twinkle in her eyes. I have never got to all and sundry, but, answered Theron, absently. Those massive things should be approached slowly. Pop out to supper, then, while the beans are warm, stated Alice. The younger minister sat via this other meal, once more in deep abstraction. His wife pursued her little pleasantry approximately Keturah, the second one's spouse, urging him with mock gravity to scold her roundly for bold to usurp Sarah's location, but Theron scarcely heard her, and stated subsequent to not anything. He ate sparingly, and fidgeted in his seat, ready with obvious impatience for the end of the meal. At ultimate, he rose all at once. I've got a name to make, something almost about the book, he stated. I'll run out now, I think, before it receives dark. He put on his hat, and strode out of the house as though his errand become of the maximum urgency. As soon as upon the street, however, his tempo slackened. There was still a good deal of daytime outdoor, and he loitered aimlessly approximately, strolling with bowed head and fingers clasped at the back of him, until nightfall fell. Then he squared his shoulders, and began directly as the crow flies in the direction of the residence of Pop Forbes.